Hi, everyone. Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us online for tonight's reading and conversation with Lan Samantha Chang and Sarah Thankam Mathews, celebrating Sam's new novel, The Family Chao. We are so excited to have Sam and Sarah and all of you online with us today. My name is Lily Philpott. I'm the programs manager at the Asian American Writers Workshop, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you to our virtual event space. A quick visual description of me. I have short black hair, round glasses with black frames, and I'm wearing a white shirt. This event is taking place across multiple time zones, so please do say hi. Let us know in the chat where you're watching from. I am speaking to you today from Brooklyn, New York, where I am on ancestral and unceded Canarsie and Munsee Lenape land. For those of you who are new to the AAWW, we are a national nonprofit organization dedicated to uplifting Asian and Pacific diasporic literature and storytelling. We hold frequent readings and conversations like this one, organize community arts programming in New York City high schools and senior centers, run fellowship programs for emerging writers of color, and publish an award-winning online literary magazine, The Margins. I want to thank our amazing bookstore partners, The Strand, who we are co-presenting this event with, and particularly Sabir Sultan for all of his help. You can purchase copies of Sam's books via the link my colleague Vandana just pasted in the chat, and you can support an awesome bookstore in doing so. There's also a link in the chat to pre-order a copy of Sarah's debut novel, which we hope you will do. You can find out more about the organization by visiting us at aaww.org or following us on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube, where the recording of this event will be posted. During the event, we ask that all audience members practice nonviolence in the chat. Comments that are racist, transphobic, homophobic, ableist, and/or misogynist will be flagged, and the person will be removed from this event. We will open our event with a reading from the Family Chao, followed by conversation, and then we'll have time for audience Q&A at the end of our hour. So please submit your questions via the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. I am going to briefly introduce our speakers and then hope you'll join me in welcoming Sam on screen to read. Lan Samantha Chang is the award-winning author of a collection of short fiction, Hunger, and 3 novels, Inheritance, All is Forgotten, Nothing is Lost, and The Family Chao. She is the director of the Iowa Writers Workshop, and she lives in Iowa City. Sarah Thankam Mathews grew up between Oman and India, immigrating to the United States at 17. She is a recipient of a Best American Short Stories 2020 award and fellowships from the Asian American Writers Workshop and the Iowa Writers Workshop. All This Could Be Different is her first novel and will be published in August 2022. Again, thank you so much for being here. And I'm going to bring Sam on screen now to read to us from the Family Chao. Thank you.
Hi, it's a pleasure to be here tonight. Thanks so much for coming. I am thrilled to be reading at the Strand. I wish I were at the Strand, but it's exciting to know that people from all over are able to participate this way. I'd like to begin by describing my appearance briefly. I have black hair with gray streaks. I have dark glasses and I'm wearing a flowered shirt. I'm joining you from Central Time Zone, Iowa City, Iowa, where we are on Meskwaki territory. Thanks very much. I'm going to read a bit from my book. I'm going to read from very close to the beginning of my book, just a little bit. And I will say that the book takes place in the Midwest, in Iowa City, and that in this first scene, it's winter, it's December 21st, and you meet one of the primary characters of the novel, James, in a train station near Chicago. And the chapter is, I'm going to read a few pages. The chapter is called Family. Please help, young man. Through the crowd at Union Station, slipping in and out among the travelers, the frail voice reaches James Chao's inner ear. A first-year college student, James has lost his Mandarin, forgotten the language as a toddler, with two older brothers teaching, loving, and tormenting him exclusively in English. Only from time to time, when he's not expecting it, will a spoken phrase of Mandarin filter to this innermost chamber of his ear and steal into his consciousness. Please help. James turns. He's looking into the face of an old man. The stranger might be in his 70s, close to his father's age, but he is altogether more frail than Big Leo. He clutches an ancient blue traveling bag in one hand, stooping with the weight of it, and his eyes are milky with time. He's seen through the cataracts, can see beyond James's generic jeans and hoodie to recognize another Chinese man. Can the familiarity be also in their movements? Something in the way they look at one another? Is it in the stranger's way of gripping his luggage, mirroring James's grasp on the greasy paper bag of vegetable jolly jow he's bringing home for his mother? I'm sorry, James says. I don't speak Mandarin. Here's a liability of his. He always wants to help, but his ignorance makes him useless to his own kind. Not just to this man, but to every lost Mandarin-speaking traveler, fumbling in mid-transfer, who mistakes him for a helpful guide. James can't tell if the man has understood his English. He shakes his head, then retreats a few steps. But the old man holds up a finger to say, 1 minute, and reaches into his coat pocket. I can't help you, James says. He's interrupted by an announcement for the California Zephyr. The crowd streams around them, everyone hurrying to make the train. Standing stubbornly in place, the old man pulls out a U.S. airmail envelope addressed in Chinese characters, from which he extracts a photograph. He and James lean in and study it together. It's a posed color snapshot of a solemn-faced, middle-aged man and woman seated with a young girl of about 10, her black hair cut into heavy bangs across her forehead. She grasps a small, muscular beagle on her lap, and the animal gazes balefully, red-eyed, into the flash. James doesn't know why he's being shown this, but as he studies the photo shaking in the man's hand, he senses that he knows these strangers. He's never met them, but he can tell they are recently arrived to the U.S. He can recognize the feelings in their mute, level eyes, defended, skeptical, yet somehow filled with hope. Family, the old man says. Family, Zhang. The crowd has trampled through. He and James are alone now. He points at the photo, then to himself. Zhang Fujian. Family Chao, James says, putting his finger to his chest. Chao. He could never pronounce his given name, Li Huan, correctly. The old man flips the photo. On the back is written, in slightly smeared blue ballpoint, an Illinois address. James feels the lightening of relief. The town is near a stop along the same Amtrak line as his own stop, Lake Haven. The track is on the upper level. He points across the station to the metal stairs. Follow me, he says. The man's wrinkled face splits into a brilliant smile of fake teeth. James adjusts his backpack and duffel. He can do it. He will lead the stranger out of this dark abyss of bending tunnels to the next step of his journey. He's singularly moved by the idea of the old man traveling from afar, from the other side of the world perhaps, to be united with his family, as James himself is traveling to his own family, coming home from college 1,000 miles away for Christmas. James makes his way at an intentional pace toward the platform, glancing back at the man who shuffles along several steps behind. They reach the metal staircase. James can see a single light above the uncovered tracks, and beyond this light, the violet-gray underside of the evening sky heavy with snow. He nods, gestures toward the stairs, and takes the steps slowly, listening through the noise of the station, the low grumble of an approaching train. There are the old man's footsteps, tentative but determined. Tap, tap, tap. Near the top, he senses a slight reverberation on the steps under his feet. There's no cry, no thud, but he can tell by the sudden absence of the tapping that something is wrong. He turns. Thank you.
That was
I have to
amazing.
hold
Yes.
this up. Look.
Thank you, Sam. That was amazing. For everyone joining us, thanks for being here. Sam was reading from the Family Chao, and it's a total genre-bending, elusive delight. And I'm so excited to get to talk with her about it. So a little bit about me. My name is Sarah Thankam Mathews. A very quick description of my physical appearance. I have brown skin and black hair that's currently tied up. I'm wearing a necklace and a black and white striped turtleneck. Sam, oh, and I should say for anyone joining that having this conversation means a lot to me personally because Sam once was my teacher. And so it feels very cool to get to read her novel and to talk to her about it. Sam, I'm interested in origin stories always. Like, what was the earliest seed of this novel for you? Because I saw in the acknowledgements that you've been working on it for 15 years. What a feat. Honestly, where did it begin and how did it change as you kept working on it?
First, Sarah, I'd like to say that it's a thrill to be in conversation with you too, and I'm super excited about your forthcoming novel in August. And proud, although it's really your accomplishment, but that's what teachers are, you know. So the first seed of this, there were seeds from different directions that eventually came together. So at one point I noticed, because I was looking through my old writing log, that I had said something like, um, I would like to write a story about a huge dinner party. Okay, so that was one seed. It is a huge dinner party, and then also there was my reading of the Brothers Karamazov, which is a book that I hadn't read until I was 40, and then at that point I became obsessed with it to the point where I was sort of gently or not so gently encouraging my students to read it so I would have someone to talk to about it. And but I think the real seed of the book came in my sudden realization that I enjoyed writing in the present tense, which is something that I'd always told my students not to do. Um, yeah, I don't remember telling you that, but I remember telling it to a lot of people. And the whole thing about the present tense is that I thought it's impossible, it's not happening. There's no way that things can be unfolding as the book is being read. But it turns out that it's a real pleasure to write in the present tense, and it gives you a sense, at least for me, a sense that a story was unfolding and that anything could happen. Anything. And it was that feeling of surprise that I was interested in, and that matched the unfolding feeling in, the book that I wrote this as an homage to, the Brothers Karamazov. And that kind of came together years after I had started writing in the present tense. So I started the present tense passages in 2005, And I had a patriarchal, tyrannical father figure and three American children, born from Chinese immigrant parents who were fairly confused. Um, but they were different children, except maybe a little bit of Ming, and their father was a different father. And maybe in 2013, I started thinking maybe I could put them together.
Yeah,
So
that
it
makes
took
a
a
lot of
long time.
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I am so curious, I think that it took me a second to I think I was maybe like 50 pages into my reading of the novel, and then I was like, something clicked for me and I was like, oh wait, this is Vanya, this is Alyosha. So on the subject of the brothers Karamazov, I was curious about how, like your novel obviously retains its like sparkling originality. And I think the sort of path of like a loose retelling of a classic, right? That's something that Zadie Smith did in On Beauty with Howard's End, or Preeti Taneja did with We That Are Young, which pays homage to King Lear. I'm curious, like, what was easy and what was hard about this sort of transmutation of a past classic to suit your own ends as a writer? Did it feel like having a guardrail? Did it feel like, I don't know, what was good about it and what was not so great about it?
So the hardest part was getting over my own sort of fear of writing an homage to a great book like The Brothers Karamazov. And what eventually got me over it was putting the book away.
Hmm.
I just didn't read The Brothers Karamazov for 6 years. And then after I started on it, I was able then to sort of find the thread of my book, my homage. Um, so that was the worst part. I had bad self-talk, around the idea of trying to do the project. And yet really it was the only project I was interested in at the time. And the one thing that you have to be as a novelist is interested in your project. Otherwise you're not getting anywhere. And so it was my primary interest, and I sort of gave up reading it, and then I found the sort of voice of this one, and the characters came out as if they were pre-existing. They all just showed up and became quite loud and present pretty immediately. And so that was the process of it. It became a real pleasure to have uh, the shadow of that book um, around, because I love the book so much.
That's super beautiful. Um, you and I both have some history in Wisconsin. And when I was reading, this novel that's primarily set in Haven, Wisconsin, I felt the ghostly outline of some places in Wisconsin that I've been to. How did you think about place when you were making this novel? Like, what pressures and comforts did you want place to give your characters?
I mean, one of my first things is that I want to ask you what in the book reminded you, or what were the ghostly outlines of Wisconsin? Did you have anything in mind?
I think the things that came to mind for me, right, were like, and I didn't grow up in Wisconsin. I came to the US, like did a year of high school in Illinois, then did college in Wisconsin, but
Madison, right?
yeah, in Madison, and then lived there for a little bit after. But and so sometimes I would go visit my friends in their hometowns, and that was my sort of
Yeah.
exposure to sort of non-city Wisconsin life. And I think the things that came to mind, I think the feeling of like being a person of color, like sort of like up against this like very like homogenous and racially homogenous environment, like descriptions of like the snow, like I don't know, like the intimacy and the maybe lack of anonymity were some of the things that made me think of like small town Wisco. But I'm curious about what it meant for you.
Yeah,
Why
no,
was
I was just listening. It's so great to run into somebody who's from Wisconsin that I had to ask you. Um, I I think that feeling of being a person of color in a very homogenous setting, um, it's just once you've had it, once you've lived with it or been with it, it's hard to put aside. I always thought that I would want to write a book in which this was the basic setup, and I wanted to write about those characters because it's something that I'd been through. My oldest sister told me, because she remembers more than I do, that we integrated our town. She told me, and it was a city, a small city in northeastern Wisconsin, where I was born and grew up for 18 years, before I left and never went back. but but there are some things about it that I think are imprinted on me forever, and I wanted to recreate them in the book. The snow was a big thing. I wanted to describe the weather. I wanted to describe that feeling. You're saying it's hard to be anonymous, that you stick out if you're a person of color, but in a strange way, you're also invisible. And I wanted to create that feeling in the book as well. So in the first half of the book, it's called They See Themselves, and it's basically the story of this community of Chinese Americans in a small city of mainly white people in Wisconsin. And it's about their issues. There's sort of a drama about who's going to inherit the restaurant, whether the oldest son gets to be partner or whether the father's just going to live forever. The father's tyrannical hold over his oldest son, and then the second brother and the younger brother and their sort of response to growing up in this family. There's the unhappy marriage between Big Leo, the father, and his wife Winnie of many years, who's decided, as the book opens, to join the equivalent of a nunnery in this little town run by a Buddhist woman. And so all of this stuff is seen from their perspective for the most part, although the narrator is pretty omniscient. You're mostly getting their side of the story. And then in the second half of the book, the story opens up and it becomes seen by others. And that's the point at which they're no longer invisible. They become highly visible. And I think that's the visibility that you referred to. So I did want to write about this feeling. But there's things about the Midwest that I really love. I mean, I live here in the Midwest now. And one of the things that completely fascinates me about the town that I'm living in now, for example, is the alleyways that run sort of through a lot of the neighborhoods in the older part of town. And I think a lot of Midwestern towns have this feature. These are the alleyways where they're like roads, but they don't have names. You probably remember from being in the Midwest, people would get their delivery of ice, or their services would be provided along the back alleys of the centers of these towns that were built. The buildings in those neighborhoods were built maybe primarily in the early 20th century, or a little before. But I think about horses coming through the back, when I think about these back alleys. But in my book, they became symbolic of the difference between the inside and the outside. So characters are often sort of running along the alley to go meet another character, and remain hidden, or having a conversation in an alley because nobody can hear them. There's a scene when one of the characters, James, remembers his father taking him along the alley on a philandering visit when he's a young child. For me, the alleys began to represent that part of the, human life or the town life that is kept hidden. It's not the outward facing side, but the inward facing side. So again, I was interested in the sort of private versus public idea. I think the Midwest is a really special place. I feel like not enough people know about it. It's almost as if it doesn't exist, and so it was also very much fun to write, to set something there.
Totally. I mean, I think this is something that surprised me about the way that folks on the East and the West Coast, but maybe particularly the East, really don't think about don't really think about the Midwest, don't really think about flyover country. And it's weird for me because it's not I'm not even technically from there, it's like but I have spent some time and think it's like a place worth respecting. So yeah, my upcoming novel is set almost wholly in Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
Oh my
And it was
God,
very
that's
interesting to
great.
me. It was very interesting to me to hear people's reactions and be like, oh, like I didn't know that Milwaukee was like this. And I was like, it's a city, bro. Like it's a place like any other place, with its own like specificity. Something that I was deeply curious about, I was thinking about how there's so many things about this novel that was written over, like a decade and a half that feel intimately, to me as a reader, feel intimately engaged with aspects of our present day-to-day life. But I also don't want to project. One of the things I was thinking about was the violence that we've been seeing in the last couple of years towards Asian American people, particularly people who are East Asian, of East Asian descent. Recently, just in New York, where I live, we had two brutal murders of Asian American women, Michelle Go and Christina Yunali. And so I don't know, but I also don't want to project. So I am curious about what you found yourself caring about, like when you wrote this novel, like politically, relationally, in the world, like what set you on fire and then sort of showed up in subtle ways in the choices you made when you were writing, even if it wasn't sort of part of your original design for the novel.
Understood. Not part of the plot, but part of the substance, or interwoven through, like what did I care about? I mean, it's really interesting. People have asked me uh, questions like, did I think about current political issues such as violence against Asian peoples when I was writing the novel, or did I plan it that way? And the fact is that I had planned to write this novel a long time ago. Like it was part of the material that I wanted to write about. Um, I think these things that we're thinking about now have existed for a long time, and that the history of Asian Americans in this country is has always existed sort of below the conversation, the cultural conversation, and only now are we really sort of engaging with it. But it's always been there. I remember when I was in high school, Vincent Chin was murdered in Michigan, which is a neighboring state. And it was the first time that I had really encountered that kind of violence. And I thought about it, at the time. It was new to me in a way, but I wasn't surprised. The the book, it concerns itself with the interior experience of people who are very much the other, but it also has this question in it that I've been thinking about a lot, because a lot of things happened to me during the course of the book. And one of the things that happened was that both of my parents, who were born and raised in China, passed away during the writing of the book. My dad, most recently, at 97. Um, and I wanted to, I'd always wondered what would happen to us, their children, after they died. Um, you know, who would we be without our parents? Because I don't, I can't speak for my sisters, but to some extent, thought of myself as a child of parents from China, and thus that was my connection. And with them gone, what was my connection, or who was I? What would happen, you know, um, to immigrants who'd been in this country for a super long time, for decades, to the point where a lot of the sort of basic connections are less present than they were. And that's why I wanted, for example, to start with the scene where James is unable to speak to the Chinese man that he meets in the train station. And toward the end of the novel, one of the characters, because both of the parents pass away during the course of the novel, I'm gonna give that spoiler, but one of their of the brothers in the Chao family, asks himself, um, what are we now? That we've done all these bad things, because there's a lot of bad stuff that goes down. Like they make a lot of mistakes. Um, what he says, we've done these things. Uh, what who are we now? We've made our ghosts in this country, and so it is ours. Are we still immigrants anymore? And it was one of the questions that I was thinking about the whole time I was writing the book.
That's very moving to me. Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. And these are things that in my own way, I've definitely been spending some time thinking about. Um, that just opened up like three different lanes of questions in my brain,
Cool.
but I'll start with one. I guess I am like, this novel, when people have asked me to describe it, I I've given them a little bit of like a 2 sentence summary, and I just say like there's like a lot in here. It's a literary mystery. There's darkness, but also humor. There's some sex, which is fun to read. I think that I don't know. I think that sometimes like books that sort of set themselves up to be like really like interrogating of identity don't always like leave room for the light stuff and the textures of human life. And one thing that I always say about this novel to other people is it's plotty. There's a lot that's happening. There's like I felt like I was going down into a rabbit warren and just like trying to like being led around in this like twisty turny grippy space. So I'm curious, because something I hear often from people is that they like other writers or writers who are trying to make it and do their thing, is that plot is hard and plot is kind of tyrannical. And I'm curious about like how do you in your process like approach plot? How like do you have like a schema? Do you use post-its? Do you have like some kind of like framework that allows you to do it?
Well, plot did not come naturally to me. So, as a young writer, I think I basically just avoided thinking about it, and my stories kind of followed the rhythms of daily life and those kinds of, um, experiences. And then I think that I became really interested in longer work and how longer work gets put together, particularly long work. And I would say that the Brothers Karamazov is a long work. It's almost 800 pages, and there are other works. I was really interested in this Canadian novel, A Fine Balance, for quite a while there, and that is also a very structured novel. I mean, you can see the turns in it. I'm completely fascinated by it. Um, and so I was I would say another thing I wanted was this feeling of surprise. What I was talking about, the present tense, the sense about not knowing what would happen, or that the sense that anything could happen. And then the only way, because I'm a Capricorn, I don't know, the way to the way to balance the
Not
sense
know
that
that.
anything.
That makes sense.
Sorry, what did you say?
I did not know you were a Capricorn, but
Why am I thinking that you're like summer born? What is your sign?
my birthday is actually tomorrow. I'm an
No
Aquarius.
way. You're an
I'm
Aquarius?
I'm a tragically stereotypical Aquarius. It's like
That's
very
awesome.
much like a for better or for worse. So
That's great.
yeah.
I mean, as a Capricorn, I'm supposed to follow Aquarius and learn from Aquarius. So there we go. Anyway, so I like having a sense of groundedness, and so it's like being on a roller coaster. You feel the centrifugal force pulling you away, but at the same time, it only works because you're strapped down. Does that make sense? And so that's where the feeling of the plot, the surprise, but also the sense that it's working in a sense of design. But the pleasure of this book was was my trying to hide the fact that it was designed. So you know, I think that it starts to feel, I think the first time the plot comes into it for me is, maybe at least 50 pages into it or something like that. Uh, James discovers that, um, I mean, his experience in the train station has had consequences. Um, I mean, just to, not give away a ton, but when he leaves the train station after the scene that I read, he's carrying that old man's bag with him for various reasons. And and then it turns out that the bag is wanted. And
Mm.
that's the moment, I think, where I felt like I needed to include something that would help the reader understand that novel was going to be designed, that it wasn't just going to be like what they call realism. Um, what, did I sound skeptical?
No, it was great. It was, yeah.
Okay.
No, I mean, I think that like for me, there's always even in the good realist books, for me, there's a clock, right? Like at some
Yeah.
points, like you latch and you're like, oh, this is what I'm reading to find out. Like this is the thing that I should pay attention to. Because otherwise you're just letting like prose wash over you and not necessarily going anywhere. So that
Right,
makes
details of life. You just get submerged in details of life, and then you're sort of swimming or gasping through these details.
sense. I think we have time for maybe two more questions. Someone from AAWW will cut me off if it's actually just
Oh,
one.
okay.
But
Right.
something I'm so curious about. Okay, so I have like one like nerdy question and one like general question. Okay, something that I could not help but notice in this book were dogs. Like
Yeah.
references to dogs abound in this novel. Like I don't want to say too much more than that because I don't want to spoil anything that's shocking and juicy. But there's a lot that's deeply cherished about dogs in American culture, right? Like to the point of making them like sacrosanct. I'm originally from India, and like comes from a different cultural framework where different animals are considered like culturally sacred. And yeah, I'm just interested generally in what attitudes to animals can reveal about cultural difference and tension. So I guess what did you find like productive and useful about working with the motif of a dog and like actual dogs in this novel?
So there are dogs in the Brothers Karamazov. It's either one or two dogs. And I thought it would be nice to carry that over. But I got completely, not exactly carried away with it, but I really enjoyed it. So one of the things I can talk about in terms of cultural attitude towards dogs is that the characters in the book have nicknames, and the three sons are nicknamed after dogs. So Dago's Big Dog, and then Ming, of course, is the second dog, but he doesn't call himself that because he's too dignified. And then James is the third dog, and actually they call him Snaggle, but it's actually a sort of transposition of the way to spell third dog in Mandarin. So, why? To start with, partly because I wanted to give all the characters nicknames, as the characters in the Brothers Karamazov have many names. But I had heard my father tell a story once of a family that he knew where they named their kids, they nicknamed their kids after dogs. So big dog, second dog, third dog, etc. And he thought that was interesting. And I also read and learned that in China, people nickname their kids after humble objects to keep it's sort of a way of keeping the gods from noticing the kids. Like if you called your kid, I mean, obviously Bao Bei, precious one, but if you just called your kid like little diamond ring or something, then the gods would know that something valuable was there and they could affect it. So it was a way of like hiding your good fortune and your love. And dogs were considered humble. So in that way, I do see what you mean when you're saying that every culture has a different attitude toward different animals. Um, in this particular book, it was really useful to have dogs in the book. There is one dog who's a character. I think of him as more as a character than as a dog or an animal, because he has his own personality. His name is Elf, and Elf actually happens to be a real dog that I met in France and just liked him so much I wanted to put him into the book. He had this great sort of like really vibrant personality that I think I tried to put into his scenes in my book. And he always seemed like just ready to burst out and get lost somewhere, which is also the way that Elf is in my book. But one of the things about my book is I wanted to show the ways in which the different characters um, which the different cultures responded to Elf. And when Elf disappears, and in terms of Elf's fate, it was a way of showing um, actually the dominant culture kind of turning on the family because of what they assumed about the family and Elf. Um, so I think that's about all I can give away at that about Elf. But I mean, I there's also, I don't know if anyone, only a couple people have mentioned this to me, but I wanted to take the dogs further than just dogs, and so there's a lot of werewolf stuff in the book.
There sure is. Yeah, no, I that was one of the more like rewarding things to read through and just sort of to read for me, where I just kept turning over sort of the different meanings, like of what a dog can mean, right? And I'm delighted to hear that Alf has a real life counterpart. Just thrilled
Yes.
to hear that. Okay, so I have a couple more minutes. So I think there's something that I'm curious about, sort of about the book, but really about like you as a writer. You know, you're the head administrator of the Iowa Writers Workshop. You're a dedicated and generous educator. You're a parent and more. Like, I'm not going to try to name all your hats here, but you wear a lot of them, and you're also a writer of novels and short stories. So don't worry, I'm not going to ask some question about having it all. But I'm wondering, is there any advice or encouragement you'd offer to writers listening in who are trying to hold their dreams for their creative work alongside the pressures of livelihood, responsibility, relational commitments? What would you tell these folks listening in?
That's interesting. So writing this book was very difficult for me, finding the time to do it. And I would say that finishing it is in many ways a major professional accomplishment of my middle age. Um, yeah, thanks. The advice I would have, don't take as long as I did. Um, I what did I do? I am always a very slow learner, and I trust that younger writers will get this faster than I did. But I'll tell you what ended up happening with me. One is I realized that the amount of time in my life was finite. At some point, I realized that if I did not finish the book, I might not ever write another book. But I also realized that nobody would care about that as much as I did. Ultimately, you are the caretaker of your creative life, and you know what makes a good creative life for you and what is bad for it. I mean, one of the reasons that I think um, an MFA program can be very useful is that, at least in ours, and I'm not sure I can speak for everybody else, we try to give people unstructured time. Um, and the point of it is to understand what your tendency is or how you work with structure and lack of structure. Like how you sort of learn things about what circumstances work for you. And then in the rest of your life, when you graduate, you can figure out whether the circumstances you're in are good for your writing or not. I mean, the first step, though, would be to prioritize your writing. If you want to get writing done in your life, then think about times in which you've actually managed to get some work done and try to replicate that, which is often impossible. It's often impossible to replicate situations like that. But there are strategies. And I was told this by an old classmate of mine from a long time ago. Not exactly a classmate, but a peer who told me, he said, I try to be the best dad humanly possible. I try to be like above the perfect dad, like, and be super dad for like 5 months and let my wife have a lot of space for herself. And then I go away to McDowell for 4 weeks. And I thought, I wonder if I could do that. At the time, I was so immersed in things that I couldn't imagine doing it. But then when Ty turned 7, I went to Yaddo for 13 days, and I spent maybe 8 of them staring into space and watching stupid videos and just stressing out about the fact that I was like not getting work done. And then I spent the last 5 writing a huge amount of the passage that I just read to you. And 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 then I spent like at least one day applying for more residencies. And it became like a habit to go to a residency every 6 months if possible. And really, I just wrote from residency to residency. So I had learned as a young writer that the best productive space for me was to have a completely empty space. And so I had to figure out ways to fit that into my crazy life. And the lucky fact is that I have a partner Rob, who's super, super like patient and willing to let me do this. And I also think it was good for him and my daughter. Oh, are we done with our conversation?
I think it's time. It's perfectly timed. I think AWW will take over with audience Q&A now.
Oh, great. Thanks, Sarah. It was so much fun talking to you.
Thank you both so much. This conversation has just been so incredibly energizing. I'm writing down quotes seriously as you're talking. So thank you both. As Sarah mentioned, I'm going to shift us to audience Q&A. If you have questions, drop them in the Q&A box. I'll read them out and we will get to as many as we possibly can before the end of our hour. So starting with Evan James, who says, thank you, Sam. Hi from your former student and double Aquarius, Evan James in Brooklyn. A question. You've spoken about your admiration of Dostoevsky, freeing you up to write outside some of the constraints or received ideas of crafted fiction, in quotes. What are some of the specific elements of the brothers Karamazov or other Dostoevsky novels that you most admire and respond to? And what was it like to wrestle with that as a writer?
Hi, Evan. It's really good to hear your voice in the Q&A. I'm glad you're here. Um, so I'm fascinated by the way that Dostoevsky creates characters and shows them in action on the page. They are so dramatic, but there's something kind of wonderful about the sort of capaciousness of his characters. Not only do they have extreme feelings, but they move from one extreme to another so quickly, and they flip. Someone will be very filled with love, but also very filled with hate. And that feels to me to be dead on. I think it's accurate. Um, and I just loved that. And I wanted to write a book where there was more latitude in the characterization, and so that I really loved about his work. I also love um, I love so much about his work. I think he makes a lot of use of certain emotions that people don't always show in fiction. Shame is a huge one. Uh, it's just all over it, all over the characters. Um, and that they behave with this kind of abandon that I respond to. I feel like I grew up writing, when I say grew up, I mean in my 20s and 30s, writing fiction about immigrant families that was like very quiet, very tamped down, partly because of what I was taught to write when I was in my MFA program, not just really by faculty because they weren't all like that, but by my classmates. They had things to say about the work. I can still remember my first workshop and what people said about the work, not the professor, but the other students. It just made me really self-conscious, and also I was sort of taught by one particular professor who was really wedded to the Strunk and White, and I love Strunk and White, and I still do. But I'm also aware that if you combine the idea of omitting needless words with material that is about sort of family dynamics of immigrants in the US, what you get is sort of like very subtle and quiet work with like deep silences in it. And I love that kind of work. And I think my first book did have deep silences in it, and it was very quiet. But I don't think that I grew up in an immigrant family that was super quiet. I think we were super talkative. We weren't just super talkative, but we were, like my dad, very emotional. Um, and my mom, who seemed to be like less emotional on the surface, was completely emotional underneath the surface. And so, when I found Dostoevsky, I felt like I finally found a writer who wasn't afraid to just put it all out there and have the characters emoting and just yelling at each other. It was great.
I love that. I actually think this leads us really nicely into the next question, which is from Shinlei Ho, and please forgive me if I'm mispronouncing your name. The question is, I've noticed that many Asian writers combine Chinese into their English writing, for example, using pinyin instead of English when they address the names of specific characters or describe certain feelings. I wonder how that use of language emphasizes the cultural tensions in novels, and when and how Asian writers should, or when and how should Asian writers use Chinese?
Oh, that's such an interesting question because it's changed so much in the course of my lifetime. Now I think people are putting Mandarin characters or Chinese characters into their English creative texts, and it's accepted and pretty normal to do so. But when I was starting out, I remembered that the whole idea was to make it as clear and easy to understand and swallow as very possible, because definitely you didn't want to turn those non-Asian readers off from your work. Um, Yet, uh, I think that readers are smarter than we give them credit for, and more interested in everything than we give them credit for. And a lot of readers seem to be sort of going along with this current tendency of people to put a lot of uh, languages into their work that aren't English. But what I would never do is to tell a writer when and how to do it, because I just feel that, first of all, it's something that's completely changing all the time, and it changes with every writer, and every writer should do what they want to do.
Yeah, thank you. Um, so a question from Justin Joseph saying, since you spent such a long time working on this novel, was there ever a point where you considered putting it on hold or distracting yourself with another project? Do you have thoughts about writing multiple serious projects at the same time? And I mean, Sarah, please feel free to hop in here as well if you have thoughts. I know your debut novel is coming out as well.
Um, I'm always interested in the in what I've heard about Alice McDermott, that she has a morning novel and an afternoon novel, and she works on them both like every day. Um, that way, when she gets discouraged with one of them, she has something else. I've tried to do that, but I'm pretty bad at working on multiple projects. Although when I started this one, I started three things that year, 2005, because I just I just finished a novel that practically killed me, and I knew I was going to take a really hard job, and I thought, if I don't start generating new work now, um, I'll never I'll never write anything new again. Two of them turned into books. The third one is sort of not going forth right now, but one of them was a book I wrote before I started the Family Chao, but after I started writing in the present tense. Um, it's called All Is Forgotten, Nothing Is Lost, and it's a short novel. And then this one, I never was tempted to put it aside after, I'd say, 2 years of knowing what it was. When I first knew I was writing an homage to the brothers Karamazov, as I said, was really terrified, and I would back off from it and try to work on other things, like the project that didn't work out. And then um, and then after a while, I just thought, if you don't finish this, no one's going to care. So you better do it, because you're the only person who would be upset. And that's, it was mortality really that made me think, I have to focus on this and get it done. And then I don't think I put it aside to do anything for 6 years, really. Sarah, what do you think?
Yeah.
I feel very far from an expert on the writing of novels. I mostly feel like Tarzan swinging from vine to vine. What I will say about my own journey is that I spent, probably wrote like 500 or 600 pages worth of like a, a door stopper. What I envisioned would be this like door stopper, multi-country immigration novel that took place, would take place over 25 years. And then I kept stalling on it, and it kept being not what I wanted it to be. And in fact, like, I got really depressed about it because it felt like, I don't know, I think I attached my own sense of worth to the success of that project for a while. And then at some point, I picked up 10 pages of something else I'd written, thinking it was going to be a short story. And I was like, this feels interesting. I'm going to roll with it. I'm just going to write this. I'm not going to call it anything. I refused to call it a novel for the longest time. And that became the book I wrote and ended up selling. And it's the book that's going to come out this August. It's called All This Could Be Different. So I think what I learned from that experience, though, is simply that you have to care. Like you have your project, it can be many, it can be two projects, it can be three, it can be one. But I think that you have to sort of be on fire about it in some way most of the time, and kind of keep and be sufficiently on fire about the project for you to sustain yourself over sometimes like months and years of writing.
Yeah, that's great.
Please pre-order. All This Could Be Different. There's a link in the chat. Scroll up. I'm very excited to celebrate it. We have time for a few more questions. I will try and get through them as quickly as we can. I think this one kind of relates to what we're talking about already from Lynn Oberlander, which is, did having a frame of sorts from the brothers Karamazov make the process of writing easier than your other books? And I know each book is sort of its own, beast and journey, but interested to hear about that framing.
Hi, Lynn. Lynn is my college friend.
Oh.
I know, it's really nice. Uh, let's see. So, I don't know how many of you have read The Long Winter by Laura Ingalls Wilder, which, I mean, I know these books are sort of complicated and people are feeling complicated about them right now, but The Long Winter is actually quite a good novel, and it's about a really long winter in in South Dakota, which is in the territory of where um, things are the way they are in my book, and the family is stuck in the house for millions of blizzards, but they have to go milk the cow, and they have a laundry line from their house to the little shed where the cow is located, and then in the morning the person who's going to milk the cow, usually Pa, gets up and he holds onto the laundry line to lead him through the blizzard to get to the cow. I guess that's sort of what it was like. It was a line to hold on to while I went through the blizzard of confusion and questioning when I was writing the book. So it did help. It really did. And it wasn't just the blizzard of creative confusion, but also just it gave me something to sort of think about as I was going through the rest of my pretty chaotic life around that time. So, yeah, it was really helpful.
I love that example. Actually, I remember that image so strongly from reading those books as a child. That's one that comes back to my mind all the time, that line that they follow out. So interesting. I think we have time for one more question. Unfortunately, I know there's a couple others, but we do want to make sure that we stay in time and give everyone back their Thursday evenings. But one question from William Shibb saying, wonderful discussion and great seeing you both. Can you speak a bit about the research you conducted for the novel and how much your own personal experiences may have helped shape the narrative?
Sure. Hi, Will. Um, so I went to a small Chinese church in North Liberty, Iowa, because I wanted to experience the contemporary, church where some of the characters go. Some of them are Christians, others are Buddhists. A lot of the research for this novel came from my own experience. So I would say messing around with Chinese cooking and Western ingredients was definitely part of my experience. The list of like what will eat and what they won't eat that the mom has tacked up, that's a list that my mom kept in her file box. The setting, the town with its back alleys and snowstorms, definitely my experience. And like Ming, I was once stuck in the air over New York trying to land and ended up getting diverted to Hartford. So that was also an experience. And the experience driving through the snow, like almost everything was taken from my experience. But I did also go to the courthouse in Iowa City a great deal to check it out. because I had to set a court, a trial in a courthouse, and the courthouse in the book is basically the Iowa City courthouse.
Mm,
Um, and yeah, I the research that I had to do, a lot of it was really just reading the Brothers Karamazov over and over and then setting it aside until I'd sort of forgotten it. I don't know if that makes sense, but that is a lot of the preparation I did for writing the book. And oh, one thing I did that was completely crazy had to do with the trial because I don't know anything about trials. Um, Unlike Dostoevsky, who was a huge fan of like the public trial and would have been completely into the OJ trial, watching it all the time had he lived um, closer to this time. But I had to ask my brother-in-law, Robert Stoffer, who's a litigator, about trials. I had to pelt him with email after email, and I think that he would have been charging me $1 million if I'd been a client. Uh, and he actually sent me a transcript for a murder trial that took place outside of Chicago in a small town. And I read through the whole thing and took notes, and that took an entire semester. It was super long. It was like 1,500 pages. And I learned a lot. I learned that trials don't really lend themselves to narrative in a way that I was hoping they would, and that I had to distort an awful lot of it to make it into a story. Um, yeah, but it was good. It was fun. I mean,
okay. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. Again, we're at the end of our time, but I actually have one question for the two of you that I'm trying to close all of our workshop events with, where I kind of call this practice calling absent friends into our space. And practically what that looks like is book recommendations, writers that you love, books that you're really looking forward to. I'd love to hear what you're reading or what you're looking forward to. Just some names of other authors that our audience can track down and read and add to their shelves.
actually, there's some authors in the audience. Xochitl Gonzalez is here. Evan James is also a published writer of fiction and nonfiction. So there are other writers here that I feel like I, love reading and would recommend to you. Um, I hope that you check them out.
What a generous response. Oh, Sam, were you going to say something else?
No, I wasn't. I was just looking through the chat to see if there. I mean, Will She is here, and Will has published a lot of short stories. But yeah, I was just checking to see if there's anyone else um, that I worked with.
Will's short stories are gorgeous, and everyone should go read them. I think that I don't know. It's been like a weird reading time for me. I've been reading much more nonfiction than I normally read, but I wanted to shout out. I watched The Bows by Emily Lee Luan. I'll type the name in. Groundskeeping by Lee Cole is coming out.
That's right.
In a month, I think. Yeah. Or actually, yeah, in 2 weeks at this point, Groundskeeping. And it's this really lovely coming of age novel and love story. Um, I have also been reading a lot of Tilly Olson, who I find quite interesting. She has this book called Silences. I'm interested broadly in class in my writing, and Tilly Olson wrote a lot about what it meant to be like a working class woman. And she's interested in like the silences in the canon, right? Like what and in our regular like mainstream literary discourse, like who is missing, what voices are not present, because they are like people of color or women or taking care of babies and the like. And then I just, on the subject of taking care of babies, I just finished A Life's Work, which is a memoir by Rachel Cusk, which I read because I am currently navigating some ambivalence about children in my life. And I cannot say that the memoir helps with that ambivalence whatsoever, but it's great and everyone should read it.
Amazing. Do you want to second that shout out to Emily Lee Luan, who is one of our Margins Fellows? And it's so wonderful to have such a literary audience with us online as well. I want to thank everyone so much for joining us on this Thursday evening, for spending an hour and change on Zoom with us. We're really grateful for your time. I want to thank our partners at the Strand Book Store, Sabir in particular. Shout out to the Strand, who we love so much. There are links in the chat. If you scroll up to pre-order Sarah's book, to buy a copy of Sam's book, please do. My colleague just reposted it. And finally, I want to give a big shout out to Pro Bono ASL, who are absolutely amazing. We work with them all the time and they're awesome. Thank you to Jean, who's on screen with us right now, and Travis, who was on screen earlier. Thank you both so much. We're actually going to keep the Zoom open for another couple of moments. We'll play a little bit more music so folks can say hi and sign off in the chat, answer any questions there might be. But yeah, thank you everyone again for joining us. Please stay safe, stay healthy, and I hope we'll see you at the workshop in person very soon. Take care.